And then just to clarify some of the crazy ideas that you see on the internet about preventing blossom end rot, some people say put Epsom salts. Epsom salts kind of been around a long time, and it's kind of a cure-all for everything, even in your blossom end rot. Well, it has absolutely nothing to do with blossom end rot. And then there's the famous myth of putting Tums tablets in your planting hole for your tomato when you transplant it.
About gives you a bellyache thinking about it.
It's just, if you want to spend hundreds of dollars on Tums tablets, go right ahead. But it's such a minute amount of calcium in those things. And you're far better off and far cheaper to just go get some gypsum or one of these other sources that we've mentioned.
We have a professional world-class tomato grower here. We're going to pick his brain a little bit and see if he can explain to us how to prevent blossom end rot on your tomatoes. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Organic Gardening, Homesteading, and Woodworking channel, where we like to help you become better gardeners, homesteaders, and woodworkers. My name's Luke.
And I'm Dan.
And this time we have a video for you on how to fix your tomato blossom end rot problems. We're going to talk about what causes tomato blossom end rot, how to identify it, and how to amend your soil to prevent it. So let's get to it.
Okay.
So what is one of the acronyms that the industry uses for blossom end rot?
BER.
Okay.
Just stands for blossom end rot.
So how do you identify blossom end rot?
Oh, on the tomatoes, it's usually right on the blossom end of the tomato and right on the bottom of it and right where the blossom was attached. And it'll turn brown and kind of a sunken area and gets kind of rotten in there after a while, depending on how bad it is. And you'll see it a lot. You see it on forums where everybody's talking about it. It's a problem, very common problem for backyard growers. And it's just a brown rotten spot on the bottom of the tomato.
Yeah, you should see a picture on your screen giving you a really good idea of what it looks like. So now that we've identified what blossom end rot looks like, what causes it? That's the million-dollar question, because people always want to know what makes this happen.
It's the calcium's not getting to the fruit, and so the plant's growing really vigorous, and that usually it's the beginning of the season where you get most blossom end rot. Not always, but that's where you get most of it, most of the time. And the plant's growing really vigorous, pumping in a lot of foliage, and the calcium is very slow moving in the plant. It's hard to get around, and so it's pushing the calcium to the growing tips of the plant. And
on the leaves, you mean?
Yeah,
the growing leafy areas?
Yeah, where the vine is growing, they're pushing out new leaves all the time. And so it's supplying the calcium for that, and then the fruit you've got set down lower on the vine, it's going to lack that calcium because it can't take up enough to supply everything all at once. And so that's when you end up with the blossom end rot on your tomatoes. And it can be exaggerated by temperature, differential between temperature and humidity. It has a lot to do with it. It's not just a calcium shortage in your soil. Usually you have enough calcium in your soil. It's just that it's not available enough, and maybe your biology is suffering in the soil, that it's not being able to utilize that calcium efficiently enough to meet the demands of the growing plant. So that's what happens. You get the blossom end rot.
So how can you prevent it with proper temperature or temperature modifications?
Well, it's pretty hard to do that when you're outside. If you're going inside greenhouses, and it's easier to do, but outside you're pretty much up to whatever the weather is.
So for those of you growing in greenhouses, what would you tell them is something to be aware of, and how would you try to prevent it from happening in a greenhouse?
Try not to have really hot temperatures in the greenhouse at the same time having high humidity.
So both being elevated is a not good condition.
Not a good thing, no. There's a chart, we don't have the chart I don't think, but there's a chart that shows the ideal temperature and humidity percentages to prevent the blossom end rot, to help prevent it anyway. That's not going to totally prevent it, but it helps. So, yeah, the problem in the greenhouse, if you have real high temperatures and a high humidity, the plant can't transpire like it should. The air's already full of humidity, and the plant can't give off more humidity. I mean, more moisture. And so then it runs into the problem with the blossom end rot. It puts stress on the plant.
So is the transpiration, I believe, of moisture, is that needed so that the calcium can move through the plant?
I think so. I'm not real certain on that point exactly. I know that you can. Some people will terminate some of the growth on the tomato plant, the growing tips, in order to send that calcium back. Send it so that the calcium's going to go to the fruit. That's the sink where all the calcium's going to go if it's not pushing more growth out at the growing tips.
So first the plant pushes it to the growing tips, and if that's demand's met, then it pushes it over to the fruit.
It gets enough, the fruit has enough to sustain.
So how do you deal with blossom end rot, like growing out here, for example, in the beds you can see behind us here? How do you fix that problem?
Well, there's several ways you can try to work with it, and I like to use gypsum. That's kind of my number one go-to source, because gypsum doesn't change your pH when you use that, and it's a high source of calcium. Also has sulfur in it. You do that, and if our soil is kind of alkaline already, and if I was to use Dolomite Lime, which is another source of calcium, that's just going to add to the higher pH, which you don't want. And so that's why I prefer the gypsum, where it doesn't change the pH. Also, oyster shell flour is another good calcium supply, but it also has a tendency to change your pH a little bit. Not seriously, but it does. And all these things are going to be very slow reaction. You can't wait till you have blossom end rot show up and then think, oh, I've got to fix this and put it on the plant, put it in the soil, and it's not going to fix it.
Too late.
It's too late. It needs to be in the soil. Best to put it in the fall before the growing season and have it there available.
We have a video showing Dad doing that right here, down here where this garlic is growing and the tomatoes are growing right here. We have a video on that. It's back last fall. You can dig through our archives and see how to prep your soil for tomatoes. We also have another video of amending soil in preparation for tomatoes in the spring. That's your second best bet.
Yeah.
You can look at that video as well. I think it's about an hour-long video. It's the video with banana on the thumbnail. So you can check that out, and you can see what we use to amend the soil for that. There's other sources of calcium too. What are those, Dad?
There's the Dolomite Lime I mentioned. It does change the pH a little bit. There's also the Aragonite, which is a good source of calcium, but it does the same thing. It tends to change the pH just a slight bit. Not a serious thing, but it does. If you're towards alkaline already, you don't want to add that to it. And then, we talked about the eggshells, discussed that before we got online here, and that's a good source of calcium. People say, dry your eggshells and grind them up and put them in the soil, and that's a perfectly fine source of calcium. But you'd have to have an awful lot of eggshells to do what you need to do if you're going to grow very many tomatoes at all. So my setup, I would never have enough eggshells to make a difference. But if you're only growing 1 or 2 tomato plants on a patio or something, yeah, go for it. It's a good source of calcium.
And that calcium source is what helps totally prevent your blossom end rot, BER, from happening. We also found out that eggshells are slow to be broken down in the soil. So it's kind of a long, slow
Very
release
slow
of calcium.
process, yeah. So you got to get those in early in the fall or early spring, late winter or something. It takes months for it to make it available to the plant roots. And then there's that garden myth that goes around and it never dies about putting Tums in your planting hole for your tomato to prevent blossom end rot.
I need some.
It has a tiny bit of calcium, whether it's 400 or 500, 600 milligrams
Between 450 and 600 milligrams
per tablet.
yeah.
So if you want to go and buy out the store of all the Tums tablets and go to the next store and buy out all the Tums tablets, that's your choice. But
It's an expensive way of doing
it'd
it.
be a really expensive way. You might as well get one of these other sources, gypsum preferably, or maybe the
Way
Dolomite
cheaper.
Lime or oyster shell flour or that kind of thing. It'd be much cheaper and probably be better in the long run. You wouldn't be adding other nasty chemicals that they put in the Tums. And then just to clarify some of the crazy ideas that you see on the internet about preventing blossom end rot, some people say put Epsom salts. You know, Epsom salts kind of been around a long time, and it's kind of a cure-all for everything, even in your blossom end rot. Well, it has absolutely nothing to do with blossom end rot. That's magnesium sulfate, and that's magnesium. And if you put a bunch of that in there, you're doing yourself more harm than good, because that's a soil tightener. It tightens up your particles of your soil and keeps from letting in the oxygen that the microbes need to feed the plant. And so you're doing yourself a disservice by putting magnesium sulfate in there, unless you happen to be short in it in your soil. But you'd have to take a soil sample and a test for that. And all soils have plenty of magnesium in them. So I'm very doubtful that you'd have a shortage of magnesium.
What's another one?
So you can put that one to rest. That's just, some people say, put the whole egg in the bottom of the hole. Yeah, you have a little bit of calcium, but it's just try the gypsum or something like that. It'd be a lot better source.
So don't use whole eggs.
And the problem with just putting things in the hole, the planting hole, that's not the right way to do it. You want to amend the whole area where the roots are going to be for the tomato plant. Wherever those roots are going to go, you want that soil amended wherever those roots are going to be. If you just put it in a hole, no matter how big a hole, if you just dig a 2-foot wide hole, the roots are still going to go way beyond that and be out there where you didn't put anything in it. It's trying to find nutrients that it needs. So incorporate your amendments in a large area. These roots will probably go 6 to 12 feet away from the plant. And so you want to amend as big an area as you can feasibly. I mean, everybody doesn't have that kind of space, but do what you can. Don't just put things in a hole when you plant. That's not as good a way to do things.
What's another of those myths or common misconceptions that are spread around?
There was like milk, dry powdered milk for calcium. And yeah, that will give you some calcium.
I think it was only 1/100th of it is by volume actual calcium that's usable.
Yeah. So it's very little, and dry powdered milk, the last time I knew, it's not very cheap. It's nothing like these amendments that you can buy for gardening. Much cheaper doing it the Gypsum or Dolomite Lime or whatever, Oyster meal flour.
So another one is banana peels. That's a common misconception.
Yeah, I think people just get that confused with using it for making larger tomatoes. It has some potassium in it. And so they say, banana water or banana peels. Yeah, it's not going to hurt anything, but it's certainly not going to do what you want it to do as far as, spending all the time and effort doing that. I mean, you can just go buy some sulfate of potash, which is 50% potassium, and way cheaper, way less trouble, way easier to spread, way easier to incorporate into the soil. You don't have to wait for the banana peels to break down and be available.
But that's not for preventing blossom end rot.
That has nothing to do with blossom end rot. So it's just that people get confused, and I think that's, might work. So I think that pretty much does it for some of the crazy ideas that I've heard and run across over the years, how to fix blossom end rot.
Those are really useful tips, Dad. If you guys are wondering, as far as his expertise, he doesn't lack in expertise, and he's proved it by growing many different world record sized tomatoes. So
And eggplants.
And yeah, you're right. And so hopefully we'll have some more this year that we can show you. There's some plants growing around the garden here and some that look promising. And so we'll kind of keep you posted on that. If you haven't seen it yet, we have a video coming out on how to trellis up your tomatoes on the strings. Also another video on how to properly prune your tomatoes, take those suckers off of them. So that's important information so you can have healthy, productive tomato production. So check out those videos on soil amendment, and you can get your soil biology pumped up and going at high speed, transporting all those nutrients to your tomatoes. Make sure you have your mycorrhizal in your soil. That will make those networks in the soil start transporting all that stuff to the root systems of your plants, starting that symbiotic relationship with those microbes in the plant. There's one more thing that's important in preventing blossom end rot, that's watering.
Yeah, watering, the main thing is to do it consistently, not, flood them one day and then go until they're really dry and then flood them again and just all over the map as far as moisture content in the soil. You want to have a consistent, so easy way to do that at least what I found, I just bought one of those cheap electronic timers that go on your hose bib on your faucet and set it. And it'll take maybe a little while to get figured out how much, every day or every other day or whatever you want it, depending on your weather. But I'm growing in the greenhouse, a lot of them. And so I just have it set to a certain amount of time for every day. And then it's consistent. It doesn't fluctuate. And so that's another key to blossom end rot prevention, is to have a consistent watering, but you don't want soggy, wet soil, because that's going to hurt, make the roots rot, and they're not getting the oxygen that they need. So you don't want it too wet, and you don't want it too dry. So it may take you a little while to figure that out, to get the right amount of moisture as far as the timing on the time clock. Just play around with it, see what you can figure out, what works best for you. So the watering is an important issue for preventing blossom end rot. The other thing to think about and remember is the biology in the soil. The compost, if you have good homemade compost, or if you can possibly buy it somewhere that's good, it's just kind of really, really hard to come by. But you want to add compost to your soil, get that biology cooking and going live, and just really being aggressive. And that way, anything you put in the soil,
as far as amendments,
they'll be able to work on it and supply it to the plant easier, quicker fashion. So you want to have a healthy biology in the soil. You don't want to go and buy Miracle-Gro fertilizers or any kind of synthetic fertilizers. You're shooting yourself in the foot doing that. So just stay with organics, true organics, not just ones that say natural on them. You want organic, certified organic fertilizers, and that way you won't damage your biology by putting it on unless you get really carried away and put way too much on. So compost tea is another thing you might be thinking about to add. And we've made a video on compost tea. You could try, putting that on there as a supplement throughout the season, maybe once a month or so, just to boost that biology a little bit. Might be helpful as well. Borax is another thing that you need to think about adding to your soil or your water when you water. But you got to be super careful about how much you put in. And it's a very, very little amount of borax that you want to put in, because that'll help move the calcium around in the plant better, make it more available. And so just a tiny bit of borax in your water, and I don't even want to put a number out there. You may want to do some research on that yourself, because you can really, it can be very toxic to your plant if you get too much, and so that's not good. So just think about the borax, possibly adding just a tiny bit, do some research on it, and see what works for you. And it's cheap. You can just buy the 20 mule team borax at the grocery store, and that's a certain percentage of boron, and that's what most of us competition growers use in pumpkins and tomatoes and all the giant vegetables. Another thing to think about, if you don't want to overdo the calcium, if you just load your soil with a lot of calcium, think that's going to fix it, well, you're going to create more problems with the size of your fruit, because calcium and potash conflict with each other. And so if you have too much of one, it'll short the other one, so it won't be able to take it up. The plant won't be able to take it up. And so you don't want to just get carried away with one. And so you just got to keep things in moderation. Just don't get carried away is a key to it.
I hope all of you enjoyed all those really helpful tips on preventing blossom end rot. Thank you very much, Dad.
You're welcome.
And I hope it helps all of you have a successful large harvest of tomatoes and hopefully eliminate blossom end rot altogether for you. If you like this video, please leave us a comment down in the comment section below. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe. If you want, become a member. We will prioritize your questions and answer them first. So that's something that you get if you become a member in our membership. Also, you can go to our Patreon page and donate there if you're so inclined, and we thank you for that. Remember, always, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life.